Yo guys, welcome to the Zelda fiction. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto married with SeraFall in DxD. Huge shout out to SoulReaperCrewe for this story. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Kuo Academy was a recently turned co-ed school that resided within the center of what looked like a very ordinary town. The school to many was the prize of the town, with many of its students that graduated going on to do great things and lead a fairly ordinary but decent and successful life. It was right there at the top as one of the best schools in Japan that many desperately tried to get into. The school turned everyone who went there into a success. The school was at least twice the size of any other school, with 3 main buildings, a gymnasium, a sports track, swimming pool and a bunch of tennis courts. When people saw the academy, most believed only the rich and famous could send their children there, and yet it promoted itself as being a school that everyone could have an opportunity in. One of the stranger elements that many outside faces noticed about the school was that almost all of the girls that went to Kuo were amazingly attractive. Like some kind of island resort that attracted people to come stay with them. While some, of course, stood out among the rest, they all were up there in beauty and unique features. For boys and few girls, it was a hormonal teenager's paradise. While most could rein in their hormones and keep it to themselves most of the time, there was always that small group that acted like a bunch of perverts in mating season all year round. Every other day the school was like any other day. The students arrived at a set time and would have their morning classes, which inevitably would lead into a lunch period. After that, it would be the afternoon classes, and once those were finished it was time for an extracurriculum class. Once that was over, the day ended and the students would go home. The day though was a different day and held a different element that the students would have to endure. Today was the one day a year where the families of each student would get a chance to come to the school and get to watch their son, daughter, sibling in the classroom and witness what an average day was for them. Few enjoyed it and everyone else hated it. Within the main foyer of the school and standing at the top of the stairs overlooking many of the students and their families was Sona Citri, or Sona Shitori, as she was known to everyone at Kuo. A beautiful girl with both intelligence and power, she was recognized as one of the academy's great ladies and among the top 5 most popular. The pure-blooded devil and heir to the Citri family of the Underworld was the president of Kuo Academy's student council, and, therefore, she felt it was her job to oversee the entire day and ensure everything went as perfectly as possible. If anything went even hairline out of place, then it was going to be her who would have to deal with the issue, and she was not about to let that happen. Despite her great inheritance and being born into a powerful family of devil, Sona had worked, bled and cried for everything that she had attained to this day. Her role as the president of the student council, being the top student in the 3rd year, amassing a peerage that she was proud to have brought together while mastering her own devil abilities and powers. From a young age, she knew there were going to be things expected of her and knew that the moment she was born a light would cast down on her, with people watching every single step she took. Swiftly pushing her purple glasses back onto the bridge of her nose, Sona watched as many of the students began leading their parents towards their homerooms, while others looked like they were ready to melt away into the ground. Unsurprisingly, the ones that were trying to lead their parents away were the ones who constantly caused Sona's issues, such as pranks or other disturbances. If there was one thing she had become accustomed to, it was pranking. Has Ria's arrived yet? I have yet to sense her or any members of her peerage enter the student ground yet, Tsubaki. She asked as she turned to look at her queen. Her queen was a lot like her in some ways, and Sona was never more glad she had her by her side as the queen of her peerage. Like Sona, Tsubaki was one of the most popular girls in school, as well as one of the most beautiful and intelligent. The response she got was a nod from Tsubaki. Yes, Sona-sama. Rias was spotted walking towards the school with a say hi do by her side. According to Saji, who spotted them, there was a red-haired man and a silver-haired woman both with them. The red-haired man and silver-haired woman. Sona muttered. That must be Lucifer-sama and Graphia-sama. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that they came today. They both like to be made aware of how well Rias is doing at the academy. Plus I'm sure her brother saw this as a chance to get out of the office for the day. Tsubaki watched her king closely as she waited for orders. Today became a much bigger deal with one of the Underworld's leaders attending. Inform Saji and the rest of our special guests. I don't want anyone making a fool of themselves today. I want them on their best behavior, especially Saji. I don't want him picking any fights with Ria's pawn. Yes, President. Tsubaki gave a short bow and prepared to find the rest of Sona's peerage, but stopped herself when something caught her eye walking towards the large doors. She watched as a recognizable patch of yellow hair walked past one of the lower windows and made its way towards the set of doors. Is that who I think it is? Her non-action and just standing in the same spot not moving was quickly noticed by Sona, who frowned. Tsubaki, why are you still here? Is there something else you wanted to tell me? Sona questioned, wondering why Tsubaki was just standing there. She was sure there was nothing else. "President, look," she heard Tsubaki whisper. Sona turned her head and looked back towards the entrance. Her violet eyes scanned the students and the parents that were walking through the door and couldn't pick up on what Tsubaki had seen. Soon though, as the seconds ticked away, a very familiar mop of blonde spiky hair walked through the doors of Kuo and earned a lot of attention towards himself. His hair was kept short and his skin tanned like he had just spent the last month on a beach out in California. His was relatively tall, at least taller than the other males in the room, with blue eyes and marks on his cheeks that resembled whiskers. Dressed in a casual white shirt, jeans, shoes and orange and black zip-up hoodie, he certainly stood out among the people around him. Sona let out a short gasp before she began walking down the long white steps, getting faster as she got further down. The man noticed her right away and gave her a megawatt smile as he opened his arms up toward her. Tsubaki, who was watching from the top of the stairs, could see the corners of Sona's mouth twitched upwards and have what could only be described as a skip in her step as she reached the end of the stairs. "So-chan," the young man said before Sona jumped into his arms and wrapped her arms around his body. She felt his arms return the gestures and wrap around her as he gently placed the top of his head on top of hers. At Kuo Academy, Sona had developed this image of being someone who was very by the book, confident, stern and didn't show much emotion. She would get all her work done in time and would handle all matter to the student body to the highest degree she possibly could. Therefore, it made the other students at the academy be somewhat intimidated by her and would tread on eggshells around her. All those thoughts, however, quickly crumbled down when dozens of students that were still in the main foyer stopped and stared at the third-year student who all of a sudden was acting like the typical girl her age and enjoying a very close and personal hug with someone they had never seen before. Someone they assumed she had a very close and personal relationship with. It wasn't every day that the students of Kuo Academy got to see the non-serious side of their student council president. "Naruani-san, what are you doing here?" Sona asked, though it came out as muffled due to her face being pressed so closely to his shirt. Slowly she pulled her head away so he could understand her better, though kept herself tightly linked to the blonde. Naruto could only chuckle before he broke one of his arms away from the hug and gently pushed her glasses back to the bridge of her nose, having begun to fall down once more. "Your mother contacted me. She told me what today was," he informed, making Sona audibly gulp. "Yeah, your parents both knew today was family day at the academy, however, unfortunately, neither Lord or Lady Citri were able to make it. Your father has a meeting today with some of the other lords, while your mother is busy with the recent construction of the newest hospital in the Citri territory. The contractors are giving her a bit of grief over a few of the designs." "But you came?" Sona asked, looking hopeful, and was rewarded with a bright smile from Naruto. "Of course. I wasn't going to miss this for anything in the world. I want to know how well you're doing here, though I already have a good idea. Plus I haven't had the chance to visit you at school before. I wanted to see what it was like. Hearing and seeing are two very different things. But I thought you were away on a mission. Don't tell me you snuck away to be here. I don't want you getting into trouble because of me." The response Sona got was a laugh from Naruto, who patted her on the top of her head. "Don't worry, the mission is complete," he told her, and noticed Tsubaki coming down the stairs. "Hello, Tsubaki-chan." Naruto greeted as he looked over at Sona's queen, who was now standing a few steps away from them. "Good morning, Naruto-sama. It's good to see you again." "Mama, enough of the Sama stuff. You know I never liked all that honor stuff. Just Naruto will do." Tsubaki nodded before noticing they were beginning to draw a lot of attention from the other students. No doubt their curiosity was piquing at who Naruto was. Sona saw it too before she straightened her back and took a hold of one of his arms. "Hamanani-chan. We still have 15 minutes before Tsubaki and I need to be in our homeroom. I'll give you a quick tour of the building." "Sure, So-chan. I would like nothing more." Quickly Sona began leading them out of the room and down one of the many corridors away from the prying eyes of the other students. "Hami, look at them all. They're all so horned up, it's unbelievable. Is this really how kids act these days?" A deep and powerful voice asked as Naruto followed Sona down the hallway, still clinging to his arm and being happily dragged to their destination. Kurama looked at the surroundings from his residence inside Naruto, with one eye open while the other rested shut. The mighty-tailed beast let out a yawn, displaying his enormous and sharp teeth as he lazily watched his container and friend get dragged around by the younger girl. "Lighten up, Kurama, they're only kids after all. Once they leave school they will all quickly realize how big the world really is outside of their little bubble and that there is more to life than just ogling attractive and beautiful people." Naruto spoke. "Though I will admit all of the girls here do seem to be extremely attractive. You can't really blame the boys for having those feelings. I don't care what a bunch of flesh bags think of themselves. But they should, at least, have some pride for themselves. All they're doing is making a mockery of themselves by acting in such a vile manner." Kurama's attention went to the two boys that passed them as they passed through the hallway. Those two were clearly glaring at you. If you weren't the happy-go-lucky type, then I would have half expected you to throw a Rasengan in their chests. They're only boys. It's not like they could do any harm. Naruto reasoned. You know you seem very moody today. Naruto heard the growl from deep within. I wouldn't be so moody if you were not so determined to get to this blasted academy. Because of you, I haven't slept properly in 2 days. Well, you can go sleep it off now. I doubt anything is going to happen today or all days. He got a snort in response. And leave to chance you getting into some kind of mess without me there to bail you out. I'm sleepy, not stupid. Even though he sounded condescending, Naruto knew Kurama meant well. In all honesty, he knew he just didn't want to end up falling asleep while his partner was out in the open like this, even if it was a territory co-owned by the Citri and Gremory families. For 5 minutes Naruto wore a smile as Sona showed various classrooms and hallways that in all honesty looked the same as all the rest, though wasn't going to voice such a thought. He found it rather sweet and adorable at how the girl he had known since she first entered the world looked so pleased and excited to see him visiting her and taking an interest in her life outside of the underworld. Tsubaki walked close behind them, a smile on her face as her king stuck close to Naruto. It didn't take her long to inform the other members of Sona's peerage that the current Lucifer would be attending today in support of his sister as well as his own queen. She was going to make sure Sona's expectations of them for today were going to be very high and she did not want to be left disappointed. So what class do you have first, Sona? Sona's lips twitched slightly higher and were eager to answer. I have home economics first, which I share with Rias, Akeno and Tsubaki, but before that, I have to go to homeroom to register my attendance. Rias and her queen will be there also. Sona told him. Did you know Ria's brother is coming today? He didn't know and yet wasn't shocked by the news. Serzich's is coming today. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. He has just as much interest in his sister's life outside of the underworld as much as I do for you. Naruto shrugged his shoulders. I guess that means Grafia will more than likely be here too. I wonder if Lord Gremory will appear too. Naruto, you don't by any chance know if she is coming today, do you? Right away he knew who Sona was mentioning and could only laugh at how nervous she looked just mentioning her. I don't know if I can handle her being here today of all days. I don't want any incidents. The sentence made Naruto chuckle but also earned him a quick swat on the arm from Sona. I'm serious. You know what she's like. She'll find a way to embarrass me in front of everyone, which I will never be able to live down. Sona's face went a little red from embarrassment at just the thought of her coming to the academy today of all days. Naruto thought it was cute at how flushed she was getting. She's just your sister, Sona. She's not that bad. He got an irritated look from Sona as if he said something stupid. Well, she can be very playful and excitable, but you know it's only because she loves and cares about you. Still, her face didn't change, making Naruto sigh and slump his shoulders. She wanted an answer to her question. I'm afraid, Sona, I have no knowledge if she will or will not be here. My being here was last minute after all, so I don't know what her plans are or if she even knows what today is. But you can sense her if she was anywhere nearby, right? Sona looked hopeful but was quickly crushed when Naruto shook his head. I'm afraid she is the one person who has somehow figured out how to bypass my sensory abilities. I'm not entirely sure how she did it, but somehow she has learned to mask her energy signature from me. Sometimes she masks and unmasks it on days where she is feeling particularly playful. Sona looked thoughtful for a moment before clicking her fingers when an idea came to mind. Then what about sensing her negative feelings in your other form? Surely that would work. Naruto knew which form she was talking about, however he knew that was a very bad idea. She doesn't seem to realize if you did that then the whole school and probably the town would become nothing more than a crater in the ground. Kurama joked. On second thoughts, let's do it. It sounds like a better idea saying it aloud. Ignoring Kurama, Naruto placed his hand on Sona's shoulder. Trust me when I say that would not be a very good idea. Then the day would be ruined for sure. She went to speak again, but Naruto motioned her not to. If she appears, then so be it. She is your sister after all, and despite how she acts most of the time, she does love you. She just lets herself get carried away at times. Sona listened and sighed. I guess you're right, as usual. Though she's not here yet and she does like to make an entrance. Maybe I got lucky, Todd. Let's get to the gym. The shout surprised the trio, who turned around to see a group of boys run past them as they made their way down the hallway and heading towards the set of stairs that would lead out to the gymnasium. Sona's previous happy look quickly morphed into one more serious as her president mask quickly took over her face and gained an aura of authority. Man, I got to see this girl. No running in the halls, Sona called, making the three boys quickly stop in their tracks and turn back and look at her with nervous looks. Now why are you in such a rush? Do you not have homeroom to get to? The three all nodded, but one spoke up. Apologies, President. We heard there was something going on in the gymnasium and wanted to go see. And what is happening in the gymnasium that is so important? Apparently there is a cute girl in a costume, no, a very hot girl in a costume performing a show for the students, he told her. Sona's face quickly went pale and snapped her head in Naruto direction, who was still standing idly next to her. He shrugged his shoulders again. It could be anyone. Was there anything else? Some kind of description beside the obvious? Sona asked the trio, who were silent for a brief moment as they thought about the question before one spoke up. I think someone said she had some kind of staff with a star on it. OHH, damn it, no. Sona thought as she took off running from where she was standing and hauled ass down to the gymnasium. The three boys were left looking idle and confused as Tsubaki and Naruto walked past them and followed Sona at a leisurely pace. Both Naruto and Tsubaki gave one another a knowing look, having a very good idea what was about to happen. A moment later, Sona, with Naruto and Tsubaki having caught up with her during her moment of panic, pushed the doors of the gymnasium wide open with both her hands. Her focus immediately went to the large group of teenage boys and a few girls that were huddled around the balance beams the gymnastics club used. A little way away from the large group, Sona spotted Rias, who had her own peerage by her side. Her Queen Akeno was by her side as usual, along with her Rook Kaneko, her Bishop Asia Argento, her Knight Kibayudo, and her latest addition Zenobia, her second knight. Her only pawn Issei Haidu was with a crowd of people stationed around the beam. Sona, Ria's Gremory, the crimson-haired beauty and heir of the Gremory devil family, noticed her childhood friend and quickly called her over, gaining her peerage's attention, as well as Sona, Naruto and Tsubaki's. Over here. The trio began making their way over towards the peerage, who quickly took notice of Naruto, who was walking just behind Sona. Akeno, Kiba and Kaneko all gave a short bow, not that Naruto wanted them to nor needed in his own opinion. The blue-haired girl and the blonde-haired girl looked confused at the actions before Kaneko and Akeno gently made them do the same thing. Why are we bowing? Zenobia asked, trying to look up at Rias, who folded her arms underneath her breasts that looked like they were straining against the fabric. Rias opened her mouth preparing to speak, yet before she could let out a single word, someone else's voice quickly took over and grabbed everyone's attention. So Tan. Almost immediately Sona stopped mid-step, being halfway to reaching Rias and her peerage when petite footsteps raced across the wooden floors of the gymnasium. Sona was halfway to turning her head to look in the direction the voice came from when she was glumped by the person she had been dreading showing up today of all days. Her sister SeraFall was the elder of the two, yet 90% of the time she acted like she was the youngest. She even looked like the younger of the two sisters, being slightly shorter than Sona and her body being somewhat childlike. Many would have thought she was the younger of the two if it wasn't for her very large breasts, bubble butt and well-toned stomach that left many women, both human and devil, very jealous. Even her clothing was childlike by wearing a pink outfit that reminded everyone of something cosplayers would wear, which included with the star she was holding and waving around. Despite being a devil, which were supposed to be creatures of darkness, she held an aura of joy and innocence about her that those close to her knew could change with a simple look. Despite the appearance, with many thinking she was some harmless girl with a big sister complex, she was, in fact, one of the most dangerous women in the world. Behind SeraFall, Tsubaki and Naruto watched as Sona's pawn Saji run over to them, having pushed through the crowd of people that were currently gawking at seeing their student president get hugged by the beautiful cosplaying girl. I'm sorry, President, I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. Sona tried to speak, but her sister wasn't giving her the chance as she babbled away, serving to only make Sona's face get redder and redder. Sona-chan, what's wrong? You're blushing like crazy. Are you not happy to see your wonderful big sis after being separated for so long? SeraFall then pouted and stamped her feet gently on the ground, trying to show her displeasure at not get anything affection reciprocated back from Sona. I think you should be much happier than this. We should be all cuddles and kisses. So that's her sister? Zenobia asked as Rias and her peerage watched Sona reunite with her sister, despite looking mortified that they were even in the same building. Yes, that's SeraFall Leviathan, Sona's older sister, Akeno answered as Issei appeared next to them, having caught the question and answer. He looked confused at the name Leviathan. Leviathan? Yes, one of today's 4 great Satans. Those that were not aware of SeraFall's status looked at Akeno in shock and surprise, being blown away that this girl, who looks no older than them, was actually one of the 4 leaders of the Underworld and all of devil kind. SeraFall meanwhile paid them no mind. I bet you're really super happy to see me, aren't you, Sona-chan? Managing to swallow the lump that had built in the back of her throat, Sona managed to ask, why are you here, sister? Sona-chan is so mean to ask me that question. SeraFall put her hands on her face as if shocked and disappointed. You didn't say a word to me about Family Day. I was devastated. I was so angry I even thought about attacking heaven. To prove her point, she pointed her staff up towards the ceiling of the gymnasium. Sona, while listening to her sister, was slowly getting a tick mark formed on the side of her forehead while her fist shook at her sides. Gathering her courage and wits, Sona began to stand her ground and straightened herself. Sister, must I remind you I am the student council president and, therefore, I have a reputation to uphold here at Kuo Academy. Even if you are my sister, I cannot allow you to act in such a manner. It is most unfitting of you. It came out confident and seemed to have the right effect as SeraFall looked blown away by the statement. Say it's not so, Sona-chan. Do you want to make me sad? To prove her point, SeraFall trembled her lip. I mean it. Please behave. But I'm just trying to show you how much I love and miss you. No, you're just trying to embarrass me. Nothing's changed. Naruto thought as he watched the two sisters argue with one another. Well, by arguing he meant one getting infuriated while the other tried to justify her feelings and actions. Overall, it was nothing he had not seen countless times before. Though he did seem surprised that SeraFall hadn't noticed him yet. Then again, when it comes to Sona, everything else tends to get completely ignored. As the two sisters continued to banter back and forth, being completely oblivious to the world around them, Naruto noticed Saji, Sona's pawn if he recalled, get close up to him and begin looking him in the eye, frowning and not looking very pleased with him being so close to his king and peerage comrade Tsubaki. The younger boy even puffed out his chest to try and show he was not intimidated by him, not that Naruto was trying to be. Who are you? Saji questioned as he crossed his arms and leant in to get an even closer look at Naruto. He squinted his eyes as he examined Naruto from head to toe, as if he was some kind of bloodhound. Saji? Tsubaki hissed, having noticed what Saji was doing and began wondering if Saji had any sense of what he was doing. Stop what you're doing right now. But Tsubaki, who is this guy? Saji questioned, look at Tsubaki in confusion. He could be someone trying to get too close to President. You know it's polite to introduce yourself first when asking for someone's name. Also, it's impolite to talk about someone when they are standing right in front of you. Naruto said, giving Saji a polite smile. He couldn't blame the boy for being curious. He hadn't yet met the boy since he was still relatively new to being a devil. But to ease your worries, I'll introduce myself anyway. I'm Naruto. Saji seemed a small bit easier knowing his name, but still looked at Naruto with a frown. He was about to ask Naruto another question when someone suddenly yelled out, Naru-kun. A moment later, Saji found himself soaring through the air across the gymnasium courtesy of his king's sister. He went face first into the wall and then slumped on the ground as he held his face. All the other students, both human and devil, winced as he writhed around in pain, holding his nose that was now angled in a different direction, with a trickle of blood going across his mouth. Everyone else then watched as Naruto opened his arms up to SeraFall, who all but pounced on the tall blonde, throwing her pink staff to the side and wrapping her legs tightly around his waist. Before anyone could say a word, everyone's face went as bright as Ria's hair when the two locked their lips together in a very steamy embrace. Naruto's arms came down and cupped SeraFall's behind to keep her level with his face, while SeraFall's arms wrapped around his neck as their mouth attacked one another. Sona and Tsubaki, who were standing closest to them, could hear a growl coming from Naruto's chest, while SeraFall was letting out little gasps and giggles as his hands pinched her lower half. Across the room, Saji, who was still holding his nose, was looking in both awe and confusion, not understanding what was happening between the strange blonde and the Leviathan of the Underworld. The crowd of humans who hadn't yet left the gymnasium had their jaws hitting the ground and eyes bulging out of their sockets. For most of these teens, what they were seeing in front of them was the hottest and most public display of affection they had ever seen. I take it you've missed me? Naruto said before SeraFall linked their lips together again. Neither were giving the other time to breathe as their tongue got put into action. Again, it left little for those watching to imagine and made them go even redder. The only one who didn't seem to be affected by what she was seeing was Sona, who had had enough of what she was witnessing. Could you both please refrain from such PTA? Sona told them, crossing her arms and giving them both a glare. Do I need to remind you this is a school? It took a few moments and another quick scolding, but eventually the steamy PTA came to an end as the kisses got lighter and lighter until they eventually parted. Naruto didn't let her go though, as he continued to keep her in her arms. SeraFall too had no intention of unwrapping her legs and arms, enjoying being close to her favorite male in the world. Across the room, the crowd of students quickly dispersed and went to find their families after Sona turned around to give them a brief glare. Why didn't you tell me you were going to be here? SeraFall asked, letting a pout appear on her face. Don't you think you should have informed me, or do I need to rein you in a little and remind you who's boss? I did think that, but I also know how much you love surprises. He grinned as he saw the pout disappear into a smile. I saw an opportunity in front of me, so I decided to take it. Did you enjoy it? I think so, SeraFall told him as she tapped her chin. Though I might have to give you a little treat when we're all alone. Everyone in the room knew what she meant by that, which caused many faces to go red again as they let their imagination go to work. I don't think the kids can handle much more from us, Sera-chan. We may cause some to faint with our PDA, as Sona likes to say. SeraFall grinned deviously as she leaned and nibbled on his ear. It's not like it's the worst we've ever done, Hanaru-kun. She whispered seductively before yelping when she felt him pinch her bottom again. She swatted his chest playfully before he began spinning her around in a circle, which got delighted laughs from both of them. President. What exactly is going on? Issei asked as he watched the older duo laugh together and continue to hold on to one another. Despite the earlier looks of shock and embarrassment that was on Ria's face from watching Naruto and SeraFall make out with one another, she now wore a peaceful smile on her face as she watched the affectionate couple in amusement and happiness. Who is that guy? I guess I haven't told you much on either of them, have I? Issei shook his head. That's my fault. I probably should have, but I guess I must have let it slip my mind with everything that's happened recently. The man you see in front of you is Naruto Uzumaki, the queen piece of SeraFall's peerage. Queen piece? That guy's a devil too, Issei asked as Ria saw not only Issei's face morph into one of a surprise, but Asia, Zenobia and even Saji, who had managed to hear her voice as he made his way back over to them. Isn't a girl usually the queen piece? Ria's rolled her eyes and shook her head. No, Issei, the queen piece is not strictly related to only women. Remember, the queen piece is the second most important piece to the peerage, since it's commonly recognized as the peerage's second in command. It has all the characteristics of the rook, knight and bishop piece and, therefore, the most well-balanced piece. Also, he is not the only male who holds the queen piece. There are many men who hold that piece and none gets looked down upon in the underworld. It's a position of great power after all. Issei nodded his head. So I guess that means he is a big deal, right? I mean, he must be if he is in the peerage of one of the four great Satans. Zenobia commented, and again Ria's nodded her head in confirmation. You would be very correct, Zenobia. However, he is much more important than you might think. Her peerage and Saji waited for her to elaborate. You see, everyone, Naruto is not only SeraFall's queen, but he also happens to be her husband. Husband? Ria's couldn't help but let out an amused chuckle by the reaction she received from her peerage members who were not in the know. Issei, Zenobia and Asia couldn't help but stare at Naruto and SeraFall, who now was back on her feet but still attached to her husband with her arm wrapped around his waist while his arm was over her shoulder as they had a quiet conversation with each other. Yes, husband. Their love story is very well known throughout the underworld and has even had books and movies written about them. In fact, Naruto, I believe, was one of the first humans to be reincarnated into a devil, if not the first. The shock on Issei, Asia and Zenobia's face was amplified at that piece of information. Wow, Zenobia spoke, not taking her eyes away from the blonde. Asia was thinking the same thing, and Issei voiced another question that was lingering on his mind. So does that mean he's really strong? Ria's looked Issei in the eye, green meeting brown, and answered his question. Incredibly so. Naruto and SeraFall were oblivious to the murmurings around them and only had attention for each other. Once again Naruto's lips met with SeraFall's and held there for a couple of moments before slowly leaning away, his hand gently stroking his cheek and his mouth forming in a gentle smile. I missed you. SeraFall's own smile formed and rested her head on Naruto's chest as purple eyes met blue ones. And I missed you, my love. Home has been far too lonely without you. I won't be going away anytime soon. My mission is completely now, so you have me all to yourself. Aren't I lucky? SeraFall giggled and couldn't help but look forward to spending the coming days with him. She hated it when they were apart and home always felt so much emptier without him in it. His very presence was like the sun to SeraFall and her family, being able to light up the room whenever he entered it with just his presence alone. The cough broke the two out of their little love bubble and looked in front of them to see Sona staring at them, her arms crossed and a light blush on her face after watching the petting between her sister and brother-in-law. If you two are quite done with your PDA, then I should tell you that homeroom starts in 3 minutes and I do not plan on being late. If you're going to spend the day here, then follow me and do not cause any trouble. She directed the last part of her sentence to SeraFall mainly, but was aware of the streak Naruto has as a bit of a prankster. She would not tolerate such activities today of all days. He's so-chan gets so cute when she's serious. SeraFall chirped, making Naruto chuckle and Sona to storm out with her peerage following closely behind her. Ria's followed after her after giving one last bow to SeraFall and Naruto, which was repeated by her own peerage before it left only Naruto and SeraFall in the gymnasium. Naruto took SeraFall's hand into his own and motioned for the exit. After you, my beloved wife. Eliciting a giggle from SeraFall, the strongest woman in the underworld gave a small curtsy to her husband. Why, thank you, my dear husband. But that the husband and wife duo left the gymnasium, one with plans to coddle and shower her sister with love and the other hoping to rein in his wife just a little for his dear little sister's sake. As a reincarnated devil, Naruto was sure this was as close to heaven as he would ever get. But in his mind where he was, it was even better than heaven. He hummed as he ignored the daylight that was peeking through the curtains and clutched the naked figure of his wife closer to him, reveling in her warmth and nuzzling the top of her head with his face. His arms snaked around her waist as his hands grazed the top of buttocks before making their way up her spine, before eventually returning to her waist. Her breasts were pushed up against his chest as her entire body rested on top of his own naked form, their legs entwined together, and could feel her dainty feet resting on his shins. They hadn't been apart the moment they were united at the academy, not that either of them wanted to be apart after being separated for months. During the day they had either spent it with Sona and her peerage, getting to know the newer members, and listening to Sona tell them what she had been up to prior to their visit. The family day had gone wonderful, and to Sona's relief, Naruto had managed to rein SeraFall in for most of it. There was some minor incident here and there that she would like to forget happened, but overall family day at Kuo Academy had gone fairly well. When they weren't with Sona or her peerage, they found themselves exploring the town and enjoying what it had to offer. Naruto had to admit the town was a beautiful place, and he could see the charm in it. It was no wonder why Sona and Riaz had come to love the town so much. It was very laid back, the people that lived there were very nice, and its schools were well renowned. On one particular trip, they had found a quaint little tea house right on the edge of the town that both Naruto and SeraFall had come to love and appreciate. It was run by a delightful elderly husband and wife pair that were very loved throughout the community and had been quick to welcome them. The tea and treats they served were also a delight that had made SeraFall blissfully happy at the wide selection they had. Suffice to say, they had visited the tea house every afternoon since and showed no sign of getting bored with it. The nights, however, were much more personal and intimate. The little display they had put on in the gymnasium had been the tip of the iceberg at what they had planned, and the moment they were alone, they were barely able to keep their hands to themselves and keep their clothes on their bodies. After months of being apart, they wanted nothing more than to be united as one, like two halves of a puzzle that fit perfectly together. The Citri family had beautiful mansion estate within the town where Sona and her peerage resided, and Naruto and SeraFall had claimed one of the many empty guest rooms on the top floor and rarely left that room until the early afternoon. That room had been used for their lustful desires the moment they arrived, and they showed no sign of stopping anytime soon. Naruto, wanting to be respectful to the other residents of the building and knowing how vocal SeraFall could be during their lovemaking, ensured they picked a room with soundproof walls and furniture that wouldn't break so easily. The husband and wife were very energetic lovers and had christened every part of the room with their non-stop lovemaking. Staring up at the ceiling, Naruto had to chuckle at seeing a pair of SeraFall's panties hanging from the chandelier. Their consistent mating is making nauseous, Kurama spoke in his mind, his voice sounding heavily annoyed, which made Naruto roll his eyes. Kurama and he had this conversation so often he had lost count at how many times it has come up. The strongest of the nine had made it clear that he was Naruto's partner, and therefore the connection between them had to remain active in the chance of enemies ambushing them, or they needed to synchronize at a moment's notice. Suffice to say, in a world filled with gods and monsters, the old fox had become much more paranoid over time. Don't be so mean, Kurama. He's a young man in love. It's only natural that he and his woman can't keep their hands off each other. A second voice spoke and sounded far more amused than the old fox. See, Kurama, Madatabi-chan doesn't mind and she's always listening in. You could just sever the connection temporarily like the others and you wouldn't hear any of it. Naruto said but heard Kurama snort. And allow you to get into trouble? I don't think so. You're a trouble magnet. I think someone just likes to listen like a peeping Tom. Madatabi chirped. Who knew you were such a closet pervert, oh brother of mine? You don't get a say in this, you horned up feline. Go bother Son or that worthless ant rat, Kurama argued back, and Naruto clearly heard a hiss of displeasure come from Madatabi before the sound of a very loud collision rang in his ears, which were then followed by hisses of pain and grunts. Naruto didn't need to guess what happened and could clearly picture in his mind an angry Madatabi jumping on Kurama's back and the two beginning to fight within his mindscape. It was a daily occurrence where a fight would break out within his mindscape between the nine-tailed beasts. Normally it was between Shukaku and Sun, but every now and again Kurama and Madatabi would test one another, which would eventually lead to them getting into a fight. Thankfully the other members of the nine were rather docile in comparison and very rarely fought with each other, preferring to keep to their section of his mindscape with the landscape Naruto had created to facilitate each of them. Okay, I'm not splitting you two up again. Take care of it yourself. Naruto told them and severed the connection temporarily between him and the tailed beasts himself, making the fight that was ringing in his ears come to stop. The only sound he could hear now was the quiet snores and breathing from the woman sleeping on his chest and oblivious to the fighting going on within his mindscape. Returning to his earlier actions, his hands roamed his wife's smooth and wonderful body, grazing past her breasts and down her sides, and feeling her shuffle a little under the touch. He couldn't help but chuckle as she moved against his body and felt her begin to stir from her sleep. His hands didn't let up as his fingertips rubbed the small on her back, hearing her let out a quiet sleepy moan, while his other hand came up and gently ran through her long hair. When her hair wasn't in the usual pigtails, it fell well past her back and stopped just below her waist, like a curtain of hair that was incredibly silky and smooth. When she had found out he loved girls with long hair, she had refused to ever cut her hair and eventually had her hair stop growing past a certain point thanks to a magic spell. Naruto watched with a gentle smile as SeraFall's eyes flickered open, shutting for a brief moment from the sudden intrusion of the daylight before slowly she adjusted, and Naruto could see those beautiful purple eyes he fell in love with. His hand had stopped rubbing the small on her back and rested on her waist, while his other rested on the bedsheets. Purple soon met blue and a loving, warm smile quickly appeared on her face. "Good morning, my handsome husband. Good morning, my beautiful wife." Their lips met briefly before gently breaking apart as SeraFall moved her hands to rest under her chin, as her elbows propped herself up against the sheets, while still resting her body on top of him. He felt her legs move a little, and the bottom of her feet slide up along his shins in a teasing manner that matched the look dancing around in her eyes. "How long have you been awake?" she asked. "Not long, about an hour or so. I didn't want to wake you, but I couldn't keep my hands to myself." He joked and saw her appear amused. "Besides, Kurama and Madatabi started fighting a few minutes ago." SeraFall giggled. There were no secrets between Naruto and SeraFall, and she had fully accepted that with Naruto also came the nine-tailed beasts that resided within him. She wasn't put off by that fact in any way and in fact, had come to love the nine just as much as Naruto did. The nine were part of the man she loved and therefore she loved them in return as well. What are they fighting over this time? Apparently, Kurama didn't turn off the connection last night and ended up listening to us, Naruto told her and laughed along with SeraFall. Madatabi, of course, started poking fun at him which resulted in them fighting. "Well, it's his own fault, though surely you could have turned it off from your end as well." SeraFall teased and let out a small gasp when Naruto poked her sides. "Perhaps I would have if a certain someone wasn't so insistent on keeping my attention on her the whole night." SeraFall gave him an innocent look that only made his smile widen. "Little minx. You love it?" Their lips met again. "Yes, I do." Naruto and SeraFall couldn't keep their feelings to themselves and kept their lips joined together with Naruto gently moving SeraFall until she rested on her side next to him, her hands having wrapped around his neck and ran her nimble fingers through his hair. They stayed like that for a minute before Naruto moved them again until SeraFall was now on her back and Naruto was lying on top of her. Naruto couldn't get enough of SeraFall and she couldn't get enough of him. She could feel her legs snaking around his waist until he felt her ankles locked together to hold him in place, while her hands ran down his side, around his waist, until her hands came to grip the member between his legs. She lined him up to her entrance and was readying him to piston straight into her, like they had done so many times before. However, before she could enjoy the pleasure of being serviced and loved by her husband, she felt Naruto place one of his hands in front of her entrance, preventing her and Naruto from becoming one. She broke the kiss and looked at him with confusion. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he told her. "Then make love to me, my dear Naru-kun," she asked seductively, fluttering her eyes at him that usually made him feel weak in the knees. "I can certainly feel your eagerness." She tried again and tried to unify their two bodies, but felt a slight resistance from Naruto. Her face soon turned into a frown and was about to ask him again what was wrong, but was beaten to it by Naruto's own voice. "Sera-chan, do you remember what we talked about the night before I left for my diplomatic mission to Kyoto?" The sentence made her stop what she was doing and stare up at him with widened eyes. Naruto felt her ankles uncross and her legs gently lie against the back of his legs, while her hands let go of his member and come up to rest on his forearms. She remembered very well what their last conversation was that night. "I asked you if you wanted to start a family with me," SeraFall asked, and she saw Naruto nod his head. As one of the leaders of the Underworld and the Satan that handled the foreign affairs of the Underworld with the outside world, it was natural that SeraFall's time outside of her duties was limited, hence why the love life she had with Naruto was so passionate and lively when they eventually got the chance. It wasn't to say it was boring and dull before she held the title of Leviathan, in fact, it was equally as amazing and loving as what they continued to share today, but thanks to the numerous duties she had to perform, along with the duties Naruto had as her queen piece, it left little time for themselves on a day-to-day basis, which made starting a family rather difficult. SeraFall was well aware of Naruto's life before he came to her world, a childhood of loneliness and pain, and never wanted him to be reminded of the life that he lost before he gained a new one with her. Having children had always been on the table, but sometimes being big figures in the underworld came with responsibilities that couldn't be overlooked. Not to mention the fact that it was hard for female devils to become pregnant, with their bodies only being fertile every 10 years for a select number of days. Even then it was no guarantee that the woman would fall pregnant. As devils, they didn't mind waiting. They could live for thousands of years, and the process of having children remained for the entirety of their lives, hence why so many devil couples had children much later on in life. SeraFall's own parents had been married for 400 years before they had her, with Sona then being born almost 300 years later. Some families like the Phoenix family had 2 of their children in 2 decades consecutively. But the main reason the conversation came up was because SeraFall was approaching her fertile time within the next few weeks, and after spending so much time with Surzich's and Graphia's son, it had stirred something within Naruto and SeraFall. Spending their free time years earlier with a baby Sona had initially awakened the want of having a child, but when Milikas was born to 2 of their closest friends, it was only amplified many times over. Naruto's right hand came up and stroked the side of her face. I've had a lot of time to think over the last 6 months, and that very question had weighed heavily on my mind. The idea of being a father has always appealed to me, and knowing you would be the mother of my child makes my heart want to burst with joy. Our time with Sona when she was a baby and watching her grow up in front of my eyes has been a privilege that I will always be thankful for, and it's the same when I look at Milika's and even Ria's. Then during my time in Kyoto I got to see the way Yasaka was around her little girl Kunu, who I came to know quite well and dote on quite often, and seeing what they shared, the love that was between them, it made me want to see that with you and our daughter or son. SeraFall didn't interrupt him and instead just listened to his words, her eyes glazing over with unshed tears. Her hands had come up from the bed sheets and went back to wrapping around his neck, allowing him to continue what he was saying. I know that night I told you I wanted to think about us having a child because, in all honesty, I was scared that I wouldn't be a good father, that I would find a way to mess it up. But with you by my side, with you as my wife and the mother of my child, I think I want to take that jump with you. SeraFall now couldn't keep the tears from falling down her cheeks and could feel the love coming from her husband. So yeah, Sarah-chan, if you still want to, then let's make a child together. The second he stopped speaking his mouth was attacked by SeraFall's lips as she showered him with love and affection. I love you so much. She muttered out between kisses, with Naruto repeating the same thing to her, their hands traveling all over their bodies. I love you too. He repeated. Just like before, Naruto felt her legs wrap around his waist and felt her cross her ankles, locking him in his position and ensuring he couldn't escape her grasp. Her hands once again traveled down his body and grabbed his member, lining it up with her entrance as she prepared for the delight that was about to come. Unlike last time, she felt no resistance and felt Naruto take charge of their position. The husband and wife had a brief moment where they simply stared into each other's eyes before SeraFall gave him the nod. It was all he needed before she felt his hips thrust forward to give her exactly what it was she was after. She gasped at the feeling of him inside her and continued to make that sound as he pulled in and out of her, eliciting mumbles and groans of pure pleasure. It was reaching noon when they started, but neither cared what the time was as they reveled in their lovemaking, not stopping for anything or anyone, and instead enjoyed the way it was making them feel and preparing for what would be soon lying in front of them. Next day. Naruto looked around the room and couldn't help but think he had rarely seen such a view, such as the one he was witnessing right now. He was stood a step behind SeraFall, who instead of wearing her usual happy and free-spirited appearance, wore an expression of all seriousness. Even her attire was different, wearing a formal black skirt, a dark green blouse and black boots. Naruto himself was also dressed very formally, much to his own personal annoyance, which consisted of a simple black suit that had been tailored just for him with an orange tie that popped out in comparison to the rest of his attire. His wife was stationed around a small ornately made wooden table alongside to 3 others, all of an equal acclaim in the enormous world they lived in with equally as powerful and influential positions. Sitting just to her right was Surzich's, the current Lucifer of the Underworld, and Ria's older brother, who was not wearing his traditional armor for the meeting, but instead a white tailored suit with a dark blue shirt underneath it. Physically he looked like the male version of his younger sis with the same hair and eyes, though it was kept much shorter than Ria's own. Naruto always got on well with the man, being one of his closest friends and someone Naruto had fought alongside with on many occasions. Naruto was even one of the few people outside of Surzich's immediate family that he would ever trust his son life with too, having told he would want no one better to protect his son should the day ever arise when Surzich's couldn't do the job. It had meant a lot to Naruto to have such a trust placed on him and promised Surzich's he would never stop watching over Milika's with or without Surzich's around, and the man was eternally grateful for that piece of knowledge. Behind Serziches and stationed in a similar manner to Naruto were his fellow queen and the wife of Serziches, Grafia Lucifuge, a beautiful and buxom woman with long silver hair tied into 2 braids, wearing a dark blue maid's dress with a wide apron wrapped around her front. Despite being the wife of the current Lucifer as well as the mother of his son, Grafia was also the head maid of the Grimmery family, a position she took with all seriousness and had little reprieve for, explaining it was her duty to not only protect her newfound family, but also tending to their needs and educating them when needed. Naruto had always gotten along with Grafia and as fellow queens of their respective spouses' peerage, they got together once a week to exchange tips and other stories with one another. Really it was a way to have a break from their daily lives and duties, and suffice to say they were very close, their relationship being only second only to their spouse, and in Grafia's position, her son. They had shared many of their lives' problems with one another, and Naruto was thankful he had someone like Grafia to offer a more serious ear to speak into. Together Serziches and SeraFall represented the devil faction of the Underworld around the table, while in the other sets of chairs were the leaders of the other 2 major factions, the Angels and the Fallen Angels. Representing the Angel faction, it was the Archangel, Michael, the leader of heaven and strongest angel currently alive. He was handsome in the boyish effeminate sense with light blonde hair that went past his neck with pale blue eyes and light skin. On his back were 12 golden wings that displayed just how powerful he was, while a golden halo floated a few inches above his head. His clothing was a mix of robes and armor, consisting of the colors red, cold and white, giving him an overall royal aura to emanate from him. Naruto hadn't met Michael many times, only when peace talks broke out between their respective factions, or when skirmishes broke out among their kind in the human world. He was strong, Naruto knew that much with the full force of heaven at his back and the other angels all backing him up. In those brief meetings, Michael has always been courteous to him and showing him respect, which Naruto reciprocated, both because it was his duty as the right-hand man of the current Leviathan, and because he knew Michael deserved such respect. Gracious, kind and humble was how he would describe Michael, and in all honesty, he didn't have a bad thing to say about the man. Sat next to Michael was his sister, the Seraph, and his second in command of heaven, Gabriel, the strongest woman in heaven. She looked a lot like her brother with the same pale blonde hair, though hers reached down all the way past the middle of her back and curled the further down it fell. Her eyes were pale blue also like Michael's and possessed a very voluptuous body, making her one of the most sought-after women in the world, and on her back were 12 golden wings and a halo floating a few inches above her head. Like Michael's, she wore robes, but without the armored parts which were instead colored in a mix of gold, white and blue. Now Gabrielle Naruto had met a couple of times before, but each time had normally ended on a negative note. Not because of something he did mind you, but normally something that SeraFall would do. His wife could get terribly jealous when he was around equally beautiful, something he didn't deny Gabriel was, and on more than one occasion SeraFall had accused Gabriel of trying to steal him away from her. Gabriel was far too innocent of a soul, but possessed a playful streak and sometimes couldn't help but poke fun at SeraFall. Every time they skirmished with each other, it normally left the human world feeling the after effects, and it took significant time to repair the damages caused. Not to mention he found himself sleeping in one of the guest rooms after mistakenly saying how beautiful Gabriel was. That earned him a week of lonely nights, and it was a mistake he didn't intend on repeating while SeraFall was around. For the Fallen faction, there was only one representative, however, the individual also happened to be the most influential and the most powerful of the Fallen kind. He was tanned, much different to the light complexion of Michael and Gabriel with black hair that sported blonde bangs, and was decked out in black jeans and a purple coat, leaving the top of his chest exposed. He lacked a halo also, but his wings instead of being white like the standard angels had, or gold in the case of Michael and Gabriel, his were as black as the night sky. Azazel, the leader of the Grigori was the man that Naruto was the tensest around whenever he was in his presence. He held no fear towards the man, and he was confident he could defeat the man in battle, but Azazel was not only known to be immensely powerful, but also scientifically brilliant. If he had to compare him to someone it would be Orochimaru, but where Orochimaru was sick and twisted in his methods, Azazel was far more cunning and was usually very upfront about his projects. It was a dangerous combination, and Naruto would have treated the man indifferently if he wasn't so laid back and carefree, not to mention he was a bit of a pervert. 5 of the most influential people in the entire world from 3 different factions all under one roof. Who's ever thought that would happen? I guess there is always a chance for peace to appear in the world. He thought. Naruto truly hoped what took place in this room today could finally be a firm first step in achieving it. Ever since the Great War ended, an uneasy truce had stood between the 3 factions after each side suffered heavy losses. That wasn't to say there weren't battles that took place over the years, but they were more like skirmishes. Nothing bigger than accidental run-ins or people trying to pick fights with the wrong kind of crowd. Naruto hadn't arrived when the Great War ended and SeraFall, Surziches and Grafia hadn't even been born yet. Naruto had arrived in time to aid his friends and future wife in the civil war that took place not long after his arrival, helping the new faction of devils who wanted peace instead of fighting against the old faction, which consisted of the old Satan families and former rulers of the Underworld. Suffice to say they won, and it wasn't long after that the evil peace system had been created by Ajuka Beelzebub. Naruto was the very first person to be reincarnated into a devil, and in essence the prototype to what eventually led to thousands of newly reincarnated devils being born over the next 300 years. Around the room were other members of Ria's and Sona's peerage, all keeping in quiet and out of the way as the talk were held between the three faction leaders. Somehow I don't think the younger members of Ria's and Sona's peerage fully understand what they are witnessing. It's history in the making. He was thinking to himself, the 9 having gone off into their own personal sections and dozing to sleep. As much as he had come to love the 9, he was thankful for the peace and quiet every now and again. From his place behind SeraFall, Naruto watched as Rias approached the table, looking focused and calm, yet Naruto spotted her hands shaking in nerves, not that he could really blame her. Please allow my sister Rias a moment to speak, as it was she and her peerage who personally fought against the Kakashi during his surprise attack a few days ago, Surziches announced, letting his sister take the stage. Everyone sat and listened for 10 minutes as Rias recounted the events that had taken place, with Sona added a few words of her own here and there. An impressive feat, Michael commented, and Naruto watched him give a nod of respect to Rias, whom quickly bowed back and was trying not to look too flustered and overwhelmed by being in the presence of so many powerful individuals. I can't thank you all enough for your hard work. Gabriel added her own congratulations along with her brothers. Well done, Red-chan. Azazel from his seat at the table leant his head in the palm of his hands as he sighed. Once again I apologize for the actions of one of my own. I had no intent of having one of my boys cause your town so much trouble. Sometimes my fellow fallen can be awfully willful when it comes to attaining something they desperate want. Let's thank the heavens Riasan and her peerage was here to save the day. No one else spoke, though Naruto could hear a few murmurings coming from her peerage, in particular, the brown-haired boy Issei, the apparent new wielder of the boosted gear and container of the Red Dragon Emperor. He hadn't seen much from the boy other than what he saw from his battle with Riser Phoenix, but he had to admit the boy had potential. Something about him reminded Naruto a little bit of him back when he was a teenager. And that was never a bad thing in Naruto's books. It took Rias 5 minutes to finish up her report on Kakashi, and what she told them didn't sit right with anyone in the room. Someone as powerful as Kakashi trying to restart the Great War between the three factions was unnerving to comprehend, not to mention how close he was to actually achieve his goal. If it hadn't have been for the timely arrival of the new White Dragon Emperor container, Vali, who was standing behind Azazel, then Rias and Sona, would have likely been killed. It made him angry at how close Sona and Rias had come to death, and by how SeraFall and Surziches were subtly gripping their chairs and restraining their demonic auras, he could tell they were feeling the exact same way. Perhaps you would like to explain why a member of your faction went out of his way to target 2 young girls in order to start a new great war, Surziches asked, a hint of steel evident in his voice. I would like to know as well. I should put all of you fallen angels under ice for what he tried to do. Just thinking about it makes me so mad. SeraFall added, crossing her arms. Naruto looked to his wife for a brief moment before they all turned their attention to what Azazel had to say. Azazel simply shrugged. Kakashi went rogue and his actions were his own. I don't see what relevance there is in hearing my thoughts on the matter. So he acted entirely on his own? Gabriel asked, her serene voice washing over the people in the room. He never had my permission, if that's what you'd like to hear. But I doubt Kakashi would have tried to destroy an entire town and 2 devil heiresses and their peerage if he was aware how fond I was of this little town. Azazel's hand came up and pointed towards Vali. I sent the new White Dragon Emperor to resolve the issue, did I not? And Kakashi is not frozen in deepest, darkest parts of hell. Kakashi won't be bothering anyone ever again. Still, I find his very motivation for wanting to start a new great war awfully troubling, Michael added. He seemed very dissatisfied with the status quo. Azazel leant back in his chair. You'll find there are many on all sides who were dissatisfied with how the last great war ended, and I guess it was bound to happen that someone would try to start things up again. But don't worry, I'm not one of them. I'm not interested in a war whatsoever, so let's get on with why we're all here. We're all here for peace, are we not? Naruto's attention was caught by those final words, but Kurama's voice quickly appeared in his mind. Naruto, I sense multiple negative forces heading towards the basement below the building, Kurama informed with a growl. Magicians from the energy I'm picking up from them. I should have known this wasn't going to be a quiet affair. I'll go find out what's going on. He told Kurama before he began leaving SeraFall's side and heading to the door. Naruto. It was SeraFall who said his name as he reached the door and soon saw everyone in the room looking his way, waiting for an explanation on where he thought he was going. Apologies Sera-chan, everyone, but it appears we have some pests enter the building. I'm just going to go deal with them. I'll be back shortly. He informed before exiting the room. SeraFall didn't appear happy by the explanation and moved to follow after him but halted when Surzich's placed a hand on her arm. I'm sure Naruto can handle it. This meeting is our priority right now. His tone was light but it was enough to get SeraFall to sit back down, though her gaze kept flickering towards the door. Be careful. Basement. Now this is a surprise. I didn't think a group of magicians were invited to this meeting. He asked staring at the group of 8 magicians that were standing in the middle of the basement with 2 of Ria's Gremory's peerage members strapped tightly to 2 magic seals. They were all garbed in dark robes that covered most of their bodies and their head with only the mouth and hands remaining uncovered. He leant against the side of the door as he stared at them, looking past them to check that the 2 members of Ria's peerage were unharmed. Thankfully there didn't appear to be any lasting injuries on them, though Ria's rook Kaneko, if he remembered right, looked a little rough up with a bruise beginning to form on her chin and the left sleeve of her uniform looking ripped in some places. The young damper, Gasper, the one who possessed the forbidden Baylor view, looked unharmed but was clearly the one who was being targeted by the magicians. One of the magicians, a woman by the look of her well-manicured hand, hovered her hand a few feet away from Gasper's chest, likely about to do something that wouldn't end well for the young damper. If you want to live past this moment then you will release them both and you will leave this place. He warned them. You picked a very poor time to try and harm one of our own. To the magicians' credit, they didn't appear fazed by his words and didn't move from their spots in front of the 2 younger reincarnated devils. Your words do not scare us, devil scum. Proving their words, one of the magicians launched a fireball towards Naruto's head, hoping to take his head off and adding to the list of casualties that were to come throughout their stay. The fireball hit and the magician's mouth twitched upwards into a smirk before it was quickly wiped away when Naruto disappeared into a puff of smoke, revealing it to be a shadow clone. What? The magician asked, startled, before a pair of hands appeared from out of the floorboards and grabbed his ankles tightly before dragging him under. The other magicians all heard the sound of a painful beatdown coming from underneath the floorboards until it went deathly quiet after a couple of seconds. Some of the magicians gathered around the hole with magic circles appearing around their hands in preparation for their attacker to appear through the hole. Kaneko? Gasper asked, looking over at the upside-down Nekomata, who was looking relatively calm despite the situation they were in. Don't worry Gaspy. Naruto-senpai will handle this. Back with the magicians that were crowded around the newly formed hole in the ground, they all leaned forward to get a better view and try to spot their attacker, only to see nothing but darkness. A few moments later the magicians were surprised as a kunai appeared right in front of them with a smoke bomb tied to the handle. Before the magicians could do or say anything, the smoke bomb went off and engulfed the room in a heavy smoke right as Naruto just up through the hole. Shadow clone jutsu. Kaneko and Gasper all winced as the sound of multiple beatdowns could be heard in the basement, along with furniture being broken and chairs being used as weapons. The 2 magicians that were left and had been guarding Kaneko and preparing to harm Gasper gasped as 2 sets of hands grabbed them by the cloaks and yanked them into the fray as a swirling echo could be heard from the center of the smoke-filled basement. Rasengan. They heard a loud clap and the next thing they knew the female magicians who were preparing to harm Gasper suddenly flew through the wall behind the 2 teenagers and disappeared into the blackness. The magic seals that were restraining the 2 suddenly disappeared, dropping the 2 on the ground, while Kaneko was caught mid-air by a set of arms who stopped her from landing on her head. Kaneko looked up at her savior, no emotion on her face, but held a thankful appreciation in her eyes as she gave Naruto a thumbs up. That was dope. Thanks, Naruto said as he gently lowered Kaneko onto her feet. As the smoke cleared, the unconscious bodies of the magicians were laid out across the floor, none of them moving, except for the small movements in their backs to signal they were still breathing. Are you both okay? Yes, Kaneko began to say before loud explosions began sounding off around the building and along with multiple dozens of new magical signatures beginning to appear, all which had negative emotions radiating off them as clear as day. The building shook and he felt 2 of the signatures from the meeting room suddenly take off with one another while the rest were slowly moving around the room, likely assessing what was going on. Naruto. Yeah, I know. Looks like we got a full-scale battle to deal with. He said to Kurama before turning to look at the 2 teenagers. Follow my clone up to where everyone else is. He'll get you to safety. Nodding to the man and not arguing with his words, Kaneko grabbed a reluctant-looking Gasper and began following one of the clones out of the basement and up to where everyone else was still residing. Before she went out the door, Kaneko stopped and turned to Naruto. What will you do, senpai? What Kaneko got back was the Uzumaki signature grin, with Naruto giving her a thumbs up. What Uzumakis do best. Kicking some ass. He told her and watched Kaneko leave the room and followed after his clone and Gasper. The end. So how was this part? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this part with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.